and good evening. Welcome to the first Kihei Community Association General Membership Meeting for this year, for 2022. My name is Mike Moran, and we have all our meetings are special, but I think this is an extra special one to kick off the new year. First, we'd like to say mahalos to our members, to our board members, to our volunteers, and certainly tonight to our two Wahine presenters. We remind folks that we don't have in-person meetings, so we don't have our Maui Food Bank collection at each meeting. But the need goes on and probably greater than ever. So we remind folks to please contribute to the Maui Food Bank. We're still told that generally over 10% of Maui's keiki and kapuna go to bed hungry several nights on Maui. So we want to put a stop to that. Going on to other items, membership, the meeting is open to all, but if we don't have members, we don't have an association. We're a membership association, so we ask those who are members, please check and make sure you're current. And if you are not a member at this time, please think of joining. I was distracted because we're trying to get somebody else off the screen here. So yeah, let's membership. And we had a recurring question come up, so we'll just try and answer it. Well, how long is the membership? Membership is 1 year. It starts on the day that your payment is received, and it continues for 365 days. So it's not a calendar year. It doesn't mean that you have to contribute now and join in January. Whenever you join the first time, it just goes for 365 days. Okay, our topic tonight is mostly about stormwater. There's a lot more to the issue of water and problems we have with pollution of our kai and so forth, but that's the main focus. And the reason is that the county presented to the community back in 2017 a Kihei master drainage plan. And some of the folks that are on camera tonight attended the meeting, and several of you who are watching probably did too. And our takeaway was everybody at that meeting said, "What, are you kidding? You want to concrete the gulches? This isn't the LA River. What are you doing?" So we had met Dr. Amanda Cording shortly before that when she did some outstanding work at McKenna when they were developing down there. We asked Public Works, would they consider contracting her to do a modification? They said yes. She worked out a way to do it, and she's going to give us the her plan that's finally been released by the county for public presentation tonight. So that Amanda will be coming up next, and then following her is the most frequent KCA guest presenter in this century, and that's Robin Knox. So if you've been watching KCA over the last 20 some years, you've seen Robin a lot, and she's our water expert, environmental expert. So that's our two Wahine presenters tonight. And then at the very end of the meeting, we have a special unannounced guest who's going to make a surprise announcement. So something to look forward to at the end of the meeting. And one more point is on questions. We encourage questions, but please put the questions in. Type your questions in at any time during the meeting. Don't wait till the end and then pour them all in, because then we run into dead time. And Amanda is not going to stay. She's got a pressing engagement that she's delayed already to be here with us tonight. But if you have questions, start putting them in as soon as you're ready, and then we'll get to them later on. But please don't wait till the very last minute. it makes it difficult for everybody. Okay, I did say I was going to be brief. I'm already way over time. So I will turn it over to Dr. Amanda Cording. Thank you so much, Amanda. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Mike. Aloha, everyone. I just wanted to thank KCA for graciously hosting these meetings so that we can update folks and get comments and feedbacks on the Kihei Ecological Alternatives Assessment. I also wanted to let you know that we need that time to explain everything, and then you'll need time to process. This is going to be a technical talk. I'll do my best to zoom through it. But you're going to have questions, and I want you to be able to provide feedback. It may take more than 45 minutes to really understand everything. So this is just the first of many chances we'll have to discuss this. You'll see in a second, I'm going to provide my contact information up front so that you can get back to me anytime you want to discuss further. All right, so we should be able to see my screen now. So tonight we're going over the Kihei Drainage Master Plan Ecological Alternatives Assessment. This is for Kulani Hakoi and Waipualani districts. Contact information up front. Again, feel free to reach out anytime. Once you get through this information with me, I'm sure questions are going to come up, so feel free to reach out. Email is always best, but feel free to phone and we'll see what we can do. With COVID and children and everything, it's a little hectic. All right, so I'm presenting this on behalf of Eco Solutions. We're an ecological engineering firm, global in scope, local in concern. So we have a lot of different projects, but we're focused on ecological engineering. In case you see one of us running around town, this is Dave Whitney, our senior engineer and CEO, and myself, much younger picture. Gotta love those. So the plan for tonight, I want to go over the reason for the study, the overview of our process. I want to orient you to the site and how to read these graphics. We will talk about the findings for each of the watersheds and then discussion and next steps. I really prefer presenting to live audiences because I can actually read faces and see people. So, you know, I won't be able to see you as I'm going through this, but feel free to, you know, put a note in the chat as you're going through, and I'll try to keep up with those as we go, okay? So the background and basis of design on this, as Mike was referring to, this study was commissioned in order to address community concerns that came out in the Kihei Drainage Master Plan in 2016, specifically the Waipualani Gulch diversion that we'll talk about in a little bit. So we wanted to figure out if we could convey the 100-year 24-hour storm throughout these two watersheds safely, reduce ecological impacts, identify areas where water quality improvements could be implemented, and then meet or reduce the estimated cost of the project. It was a very expensive project. Apologize in advance if you can hear my kid in the background. So our approach, generally speaking, we looked into community engagement, you know, what are the community's concerns in these two watersheds? We went through a long process of data gathering and assessment. We developed the alternative assessment and cost estimate. Now we're at 4.4, it's community outreach and feedback. This is where we're actually going to have that opportunity to give you the information, what we found, and then hear back from you, and then we'll present that final plan. So some of the considerations that we had to go through in these two watersheds, they're complex watersheds. So we needed to think through the ecological impact of past practices. They're highly developed, and a lot of the situation doesn't take into consideration modern regulations. Land ownership, is it public or private within these drainage areas? Regulations, current versus past. The current hydrology versus natural channel hydrology. They're completely modified systems. So what would it have been like in the past, and then what is it like now? Data quality and accuracy, what kind of precipitation model assumptions are being used within these systems, the cost, and then also Malca conditions. So I won't go through the methods in detail. We have presented this before and it's highly technical, but generally speaking, we used models to try to develop Flood elevations within the watersheds, what are, when it floods, how high are these waters? What are the cross sections like? How much flooding is there? And then that was all cross-checked with local precipitation data, USGS stream gauges, flooding reports, and then we created a GIS database. If you're not familiar with geographic information systems, it's like a visual overlay of all the information. And we brought all the information together, like existing stormwater infrastructure, soils, wetlands, watershed boundaries, contours, TMKs, anything that you could think of that would be relevant. So some of the tools that I want to kind of front in this presentation that are really helpful in an ecological engineering perspective, but with high flows, I just want to run through some of them quickly. There's products available like GeoWeb that we'll be talking about later. For channel stabilization, this is just some of the ways that you can kind of do some alternative ecological engineering instead of that concrete channel approach. North American Green is a company that provides a lot of products for stabilization. Lots of soil stabilization options to be considered. A lot of these banks just actually need to be stabilized once they're shaped, instead of using concrete. So there's a couple of options here as well. I'm not going to go through them all. I just want to give you a sense of some of the things that we look at and consider. Regenerative stormwater conveyance is really important. Maybe there are areas where we can slow the water down, pool it behind rocks, and then let it flow over riffles to drop out sediment. Just really high level, some of the things that we were thinking about. Dune stabilization is going to come up in this talk. What are some alternative dune stabilization techniques? Once you open up a dune, you need to pin it down if the water's not going to keep it there on its own. And then of course, low impact development, which is great to mimic pre-development hydrology. But when you have flows like this, we have to think about, do we need to control flooding first and then look at low impact development? Maybe, we'll have to see. So jumping into Kalaniʻakoi and Waipuʻulani, I just want to show you, so Kalaniʻakoi is always going to be the one to the north and Waipuʻulani is the one to the south. It's truly amazing when you look at Hawaii watersheds, because they do go, Mauka to Makai, all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. So you can imagine all of this water having to get from high to low. It's quite a bit of water. So the first thing we wanted to look at was that Waipuʻulani Gulch diversion. That proposed transfer, whenever you see this KDMP up here at the top, it's Kihei Drainage Master Plan. So I'm referring to the Kihei Drainage Master Plan that was put out earlier in the year by the county proposing these options. So the Kihei Drainage Master Plan included that Waipuʻulani Gulch diversion, and the diversion proposed to transfer over 8,000 cubic feet per second from one watershed over to the other watershed through a concrete channel. So that was the highest ecological impact thing that we wanted to look at first. What would need to be done to convey that 100-year, 24-hour flood through the existing channels to avoid that gulch diversion? Basically, can we avoid it? Can it be done? So the study area focused primarily on the area Makai of Piʻilani Highway. There is a large area Mauka, obviously, but this study didn't really focus on that. That would need to be done in a future study. And I'll show a slide later that shows those landowners, but this study looked at everything Makai of Piʻilani Highway. So this is kind of what we had to work with. This is showing the areas that are currently still the natural channel. And you can see there's not a lot left. There's still some left, but it's really been highly encroached on by development. So this is a slide showing from the Kihei Drainage Master Plan, the existing conditions. And I just wanted to show you, this is the channel within these existing conditions. So this is pushing over 10,000 cubic feet per second from top to bottom through this channel with the proposed modeling precipitation values that were used. That number will come up a lot. So 10,000 CFS through here. That creates quite a bit of flooding shown in this red area at the bottom, as we all know, right? We just experienced that huge flood. So The future development slide, I wanted to show in pink are the areas that are currently kind of up for development. There's plans to develop them. So I just wanted to show you the one in the channel that we just wanted to at least keep an eye on is this one here. There's 2 parcels. There's a condo and a preschool proposed for this area. So that's kind of what we were working with in Kalani Hakoi. So what I'm going to do is take you from Mauka to Mackay and show you what we saw when we investigated this channel in terms of existing conditions. Basically, why is this area flooding? We investigated to see what were the conditions causing the flooding. And I'm going to show you a lot of cross sections, but I'll try to orient you as best I can. So we'll go from top to bottom, zone 5 down to zone 1. This is Pi'ilani. Okay, so zone 5, we've got the condos and the preschool kind of highlighted here in yellow. Within zone 5, so this is a cross section on the left. So the black line is existing channel conditions. The blue line is how high the water would be in the 100-year flood. The pink line is what we're proposing. So if you excavated this channel a little bit on both sides, the water would go to the orange line, this one. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this visually for you as we go. All right, so current conditions, then, oh, and this is the south bank and this is the north bank. So you can see the south bank is okay and the north bank floods. And we'll do lots of these, so you'll get the hang of it for sure. If we excavate the channel, we can lower the water to be within existing banks. So that one's not too bad. That's actually a pretty minor change. Excavating any channel is a big deal though. So we just first of all had to focus on flooding, how to get the water from A to B safely. In zone 4, we have some existing channel here, but it looks narrower. So let's see how the floodwaters did. Oh, so interestingly, in this area, the channel can hold the existing flow. So that's excellent with some channel, with some vegetation management. So when you increase roughness, you can get the channel waters down to this orange line, but really not a big deal. So that's great. That was good news. That portion of the channel can hold the water, no problem. Now we go into zone 3, which is shown, these different yellow lines show different parcels, different ownership. So within zone 3, the whole thing floods. So in a 100-year event, this would all be underwater. So you can see the black line is existing conditions and the blue line is projected flood elevations in the 100-year event. So the whole thing underwater. But, so there's 3 foot of flooding on the south bank and over 5.5 foot of flooding on the north bank. But if we introduce flood walls, which are a technique to hold floodwaters in, we can contain the 100-year event and we don't have to use concrete walls. So one of the things that's really important is this can look very natural and still have sort of more of an ecological connectivity aspect to it. So there's all kinds of green retaining walls that can be used. But, you know, if we want to convey floodwaters from A to B, these are some of the things that we need to consider. Now we're going into zone 2, which is South Kihei Road. So along the road itself, there are 4 6x4 feet, that should be feet, box culverts. The current capacity of these culverts is 672 CFS. The required conveyance, which means they should be pushing 10,000 CFS through. So we know this is a story that most locals know, but in case you don't, these are highly undersized. So one of the first things that could be done is to replace these culverts with culverts that would adequately serve the area and the flows going through there. This is a very complex graphic, but what I want to show you is, here's the existing culverts, here's the road, the big black line. And current flood elevation is very, very high over the road. As we know, it's about 6 feet, or yeah, 4 to 6 feet above the existing road here. In a big 100-year storm event, it would be very, very high. You know that. If we implemented a large culvert system, sort of a bridge, basically, we can get the water to be within that proposed infrastructure. This one is saying 6 9x20 box culverts. They can be made of different things, and this is what one might look like. I don't want to set any specifics down, but just to give you a general sense in case you're not a culvert expert, this is something to kind of imagine. So in zone 1, which is the dunes at the very bottom of the watershed, the existing dunes, again showing here in black, just about hold the current water. But the thing is, the dunes and the culverts that are undersized across the road are pushing the water back. They're holding the water back and creating flooding back upstream. So if you were, now there's something else to note here. If the culverts are replaced, the natural hydrology of the channel will likely flush out those dunes, and it will likely keep them flushed out for a portion of the year. But we're not entirely sure how much maintenance they would require. That's something we need to study further. So if there was a excavation of the dunes to natural conditions in concert with opening up the culverts, really just trying to open up that area so that it's closer to its natural hydrologic state, then we can definitely convey the floodwaters. So it would be a much more natural state, but we would need to pin them down. So there's not a lot of data yet in terms of how well the dunes would stabilize. So we would likely need to implement a dune stabilization technique. There's all kinds, natural fiber blankets, core rolls, sand fencing, but that's something that would need study as well. It's just looking at which method would be most appropriate, and especially with hawksbill turtles and potential EV and all the things that would go into looking at these dunes, it's really important to take that carefully, slowly, and lots of communication, but just conveying options. This is one option. Okay, so those are the main information pieces for Kalaniʻōkoʻi. So I'll just take you through them again in summary. So in this early zone, there's some minor channel grading needed to increase capacity, or the significant grading would give us more opportunity for water quality improvements, which I'll talk about in a little while. You can manage the vegetation in the main portion of the channel to convey high flows. There would likely need to be some walls on both the north and south banks in order to contain those high floods. The road needs to be raised, and we need much, much bigger box culverts to move those flows through. And then either let the dunes flush out naturally and then pin them down, or monitor them, or excavate. So overall, these options cost rough order of magnitude from our estimates about $6.5 million. That's a lot of money, but in the Kihei Drainage Master Plan, they had about 57 million. That included the gulch diversion, improved channel conveyance, detention basins up Mauka, so some other things that we didn't. But this is just giving you a rough sense of what we're seeing to date. Okay, so that's Kalaniʻōkoʻi. We're going to move to Waipuʻulani. As you can see here, Waipuʻulani, we have some room upstream. This portion of the channel is open, but it is private. I'll go over that in a second. And then there's this tiny little narrow portion to work with, right about here, if you can see my cursor. And then we have the Waipuʻulani Park at the bottom. So this was an interesting area to try to get water to flow from A to B without the gulch diversion. So again, existing conditions, this one has 8,000 CFS moving through. There is considerable flooding at the bottom. And it is important to know that in the proposed developments, Ho'onani Homes is one of the developments here in this channel. It's almost this entire portion with a little bit in the narrow as well. So same thing, I'm going to take you to Mauka to Mackay. We'll get to know the watershed and I'll show you the channel cross sections. Okay, so up Mauka, still just Mackay, Pi'ilani Highway. We've got zone 6. This is county land. Looks like this, looking Mauka toward the bridge. So there's good conveyance here. There's, depending on the time of year, I'm sure the vegetation gets big, but that's what it looks like. This is the Lilola Drive Road extension, kind of right here, if you're familiar with that. And then here's the Ho'onani Homes portion. And then we've got the condos on the north and south. This teensy little line right here is the channel, and all of that water is trying to move through there to the ocean. So you can imagine this was quite a challenge. At the bottom here, we have the park, Waipulani Park, which is a wetland. And then when we were looking at it, we're not entirely sure and would need confirmation, but this looks like a historic fish pond. So we'll chat with folks about that at the very outlet. So a lot of opportunity here for some good restoration work, but a challenging site with the narrow constraints. Okay, so same thing, Mauka to Mackay. Hopefully you're not asleep. Okay, Waipulani Zone 6. So this portion of the channel you can see, oh, beautiful. It contains the water marvelously, no problems there. But then we actually skipped the Waipulani or the Ho'onani Homes section. It's important because we're not exactly sure what's happening there, what the plans are for maintaining the channel or not. We assumed in our study that drainage in a private development would need to maintain the channel and that flows wouldn't be able to increase per Maui County standards. So we're skipping Ho'onani and we'll go down to zone 4, this very narrow area. Okay, yeah, so in existing conditions, the black is the bottom of the channel and the blue is the flood line. So the whole area floods. And in order to contain that flood water, there are houses on the south bank that would either need to be acquired or there's some discussion needed there in terms of what exactly to do in this area with private property and flood conveyance conflicts. So we need to discuss that, but there is potential to have 2 walls on the north and south and still convey that floodwater through safely in that area. Mauka of the channel intersection, the channel needs to be widened up to about 100 feet and would require the removal or raising of properties at this whole area here that's in the yellow hatch. That's now 915 South Kihei Road. So that is troubling. That is what we're finding so far. The channel culvert capacity at South Kihei Road is currently 200 CFS. That is hilarious because it needs to convey 8,000 CFS. So there obviously needs to be a large culvert replacement there. So you can kind of see, again, this is a little bit of a complex graphic, but this is the south bank. And this is the north bank, so south, north, and then we've got the existing channel, this tiny little thing here, and the flood elevation is in taking up that whole area. So It's basically just the channel is not large enough to push the water through there. But we came up with 4 alternatives. I'm not sure if you can see, there we go. There are 4 alternatives, all increasingly complex and basically involving culverts, culvert sizes, bridges, to get the water from A to B. So I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but what I will do is just try to visually show you what would need to happen in all of these situations. So this is the proposed bridge in alternative 1. And this is how the flood walls would need to look, and the channel would need to be 70 foot wide. So, you know, basically you can convey the water if you do these things. And they all have a rough order of magnitude cost associated with them. So option 1 is approximately $6 million. The Kihei Drainage Master Plan for Waipualani was at about 16. So we're still under, which is good. Again, another alternative 2 is, you know, a different size bridge and another size culvert. So given the time, I'm not going to go into detail, but I just want to show you there's a number of different ways to do it, but they each have a compromise and a cost. So some of them, various parking lots for these private developments would need to be either given up or a culvert placed underneath them. There's a number of different options, but at this time of night, I won't go through them with you, but they all have a cost and they all have a compromise. So one of the big questions is, you know, if you want to avoid that gulch diversion, there needs to be significant communication with these private landowners, with county in terms of budget, to figure out the best option for getting the water to move from A to B. I hope I'm not oversimplifying it, but that's the overall conclusion. And then once you get water through that very narrow, tight strip, you can really look at wetland restoration options. So this whole area is wetlands, and aside from the tennis courts, it's pretty boggy. So it would be very reasonable to do some micro topography work and really benefit water quality by holding the water during high storm events in this area, and then bringing in some wetland plants and really thinking through what did it look like before, and you know, how can we move more in a culturally sensitive historical direction instead of the traditional, you know, just push water from A to B. So again, just reviewing for Waipualani, in this upper area where there's county-owned land, there's opportunity for increasing water quality benefits if you slow the water down in this area, but that did move water from A to B very well. There was room within that portion of the channel. We need to determine how Ho'onani homes would convey the water, especially given there would not be a gulch diversion in this ecological alternatives analysis. So the water would still be moving through there at the original 8,000 CFS. So we're not sure about that. Then there would be some walls again on both the north and south side, holding that floodwater in, and potentially some property acquiring by the county. Would need to raise the road and install some very large culverts and or a bridge in that area. That very narrow channel would need to be widened. And again, there were 4 options presented, all balancing a compromise of culverts, bridges, and parking lot, either construction or acquiring portion of the parking lots for those private developments. And then finally, if we can get the water through to there, we can look at wetland restoration and storage within that natural wetland again. So the next steps, we're really looking for, you know, based on all this information after processing, community feedback. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are your reactions? We also need to consider current county freeboard requirements. The wall heights that we present in the report do not consider current county freeboard requirements. There's many reasons for that. I can go into detail, but we would need to consider that. In the rainfall models, the flows are actually potentially overestimated within these two systems. 10,000 and 8,000 CFS is extremely large, and there are reasons for that in the way that the models were constructed and put together. There's refinement possibilities there. So we're looking into that as a potential next step, and then a final plan. So again, thank you so much for your time. And if you would like to email me and discuss anything further, I'm always happy to engage. I think we are going to take questions now, but I'll defer to Mike and Rob on that.
Yes, I think a few questions in there, and your timing was exquisite, Amanda. So I was just about to cut in and tell you how much time you had left. So if you can see those questions, I think there's 3 or maybe 4, and you can address them as best you can.
Okay. All right, let's see what we've got. Okay, instead of just conveying floodwater into the ocean, has anyone thought of or discussed creating wetland retention areas Mauka of the highway before all the Mauka area gets developed too? Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. So our study wasn't so much focused on Mauka, but when we do look at that, there are significant private property owners in those areas. And if there was a partnership developed, I think there is an opportunity to work with them to retain water Mauka for sure. It's a ton of water, so it would be a large, potentially a large area, but that is definitely a possibility. And I do want to point out that in the Kihei Drainage Master Plan, the original one, there was detention basins were proposed in the Mauka area, not so much wetland retention, but more traditional retention. But either way, that Mauka area has a lot of potential to hold water. So working in partnership with them is key. And then also, when you look at the whole sediment transport within that watershed, those 2 watersheds, I think it's really important to look out of Mauka, because the mud is going to come from somewhere, and a portion of it may actually be coming from Mauka. I'm not saying it is, we don't know yet, but looking at those areas is definitely part of the plan. So considering the whole thing, Mauka to Mackay, is key. Great question. Mike, you've got, what are freeboard requirements? Freeboard is kind of like another height that would be added on to a, so if you have a wall that's supposed to be holding water from bottom to top, the county has an equation, it's a freeboard requirement equation that would then also require, based on flow, an additional height to be put on the walls. And unfortunately, we don't really like walls, but walls are necessary in this case. And then to have to add another height on top of the wall when the flows are overestimated might not be the best idea, especially since the development in this area is actually, was put in before any stormwater requirements. None of this really would have gone into the gully if the modern regulations were in place. So we have to negotiate a little bit on that, but we'll see how it all goes. Any other questions? If not, I will pass it to Robin Knox to do her presentation.
Amanda, there's one other question. I don't know if you can scroll up at the top. I can read it. It says, question from Tina Wildberger. Do you see it? Or
yes, I do. Thank
okay.
you. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, Tina, thank you. How do we remediate insufficient infrastructure that already exists around homes that are at risk of flooding? Complexes in North Kihei regularly flood with mud when we have a major rain event. What remedies can be considered to make sure this doesn't happen over and over again? It's a big question. So there's the minor flooding considerations and then the major flooding considerations. Something like low impact development is really, really useful for the smaller storms, especially in the short term. So if there is, it's all sort of site specific, but if there is an area that is flooding frequently, it's likely that that infrastructure, like you're saying, is just inadequate. It maybe wasn't sized for the 100-year storm. Maybe it was only sized for the 50. It depends on the drainage area with Maui County requirements. In a smaller drainage area, smaller pipes are allowed. So if there is a larger pipe that could do it, I mean, my quick answer is it's site specific, but once you take into consideration where the pipes are going, what size they are, and how it all connects back to the natural infrastructure, the channel or the wetland or whatever is kind of close by, you can either remove the outlet pipe and daylight it to, you know, a natural system, especially if you filter it first. But it's kind of a complex question that is site specific. So sorry, Tina, I'm not doing a good job answering it, but you know, just reach out and we can talk about it in more detail. Any other questions? Oh, I got a new one. Oh, how accurate is CFS modeling? Do we need to measure it to know? From Andrew. One of the really important things in these two watersheds that I alluded to, but didn't go into detail about, is the precipitation modeling. So what happens right now, if you can imagine, the watershed has a precipitation value that is used from Mauka to Makai, one value, something like 9 inches, I think, in Kulani-Hakoi. And that value is placed along the entire watershed to generate a flow, a cubic feet per second. And then that cubic feet per second is pushed through the entire watershed, and a lot of assumptions are made based on that value. So if that one precipitation value is inaccurate, everything else ends up inaccurate as well. What another way to do it is, and it's a much more refined way, is more of a grid. Because we know in Hawaii, you know, a lot of these methods come from elsewhere where, yeah, one precipitation value would be fine. But in Hawaii, it's not fine because Mauka receives higher precipitation than Makai. So if you apply more of a grid over the landscape based on rain gauges and real values, then you have a much more refined understanding of where the precipitation is really falling and how much flow that would really create. And it really decreases those flows quite a lot. And then also there's some other modeling refinements that can go into it, like vegetation roughness and things like that, that would be important to look at in a refined model. So it's not all that accurate currently, and it is costly when you make big assumptions like that, but that's how we are doing things today. And then there's one more question. Okay, while your suggestions would alleviate mud, flooding on Kihei, they would actually prove more devastating to the ocean reefs and beaches. How about huge shallow retention basins in the middle of the island? The collected mud could be recycled for lawn and garden use, and the water would add to the groundwater. This is very similar to the previous question about Opmauka retention basins. Yeah, it's definitely something to consider, especially if the mud is coming from that area. So I think first things first, kind of figure out what's coming from where. And then in general, slowing down that water, holding it, letting sediment drop out. It depends on the kind of sediment. If it's silty clay, it'll just come with the water. It takes a very long time to settle that out. But if it's a little bigger, yeah, holding it, let it settle, and then release it. But again, these are very large flows, so the water does have to kind of keep moving. There may not be a retention basin large enough to hold it all for the time it would need to settle that sediment. But yeah, great question. I think I'll turn it over to Robin at this point, if it's okay with you, Mike.
Yes, Amanda, we just want to express our sincere thanks to you for presenting this. And as you said at the beginning, this is just the beginning of the process. but it's looking at it from a different perspective than we've seen before. And that's what we always keep saying. Well, if you do the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result. So you're offering, let's look at it from a different perspective. And we really, truly appreciate you devoting this time to our community so we can see this. So I wanted to get that in there before you turn it over to Robin Knox.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Aloha, everyone. I am very happy to be here, your most frequent presenter, according to Mike Moran's calculations. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay,
My
great.
calculations are always right.
Oh, there I am. I wasn't showing up on my own screen. So I'm going to share my screen and give a little presentation here. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, are you seeing my title slide?
Yes, it looks fine.
All right, great. So I am giving this presentation on behalf of the Save the Wetlands Hui, which is a group of South Maui residents, and we've actually attracted people from all over the island now who are interested in saving the wetlands for a variety of reasons. And many of our wetlands, as you'll see, are threatened by development, and we think that they're important and have functions and values to our community. The question that was put out for this talk tonight is, can we prevent flooding and protect the ocean water quality? And it's a good question because traditionally the engineering to help with drainage and flooding would be the opposite of what you need for protecting water quality. The traditional engineering would be get the water off the land as quickly as possible, and that doesn't give time for the sediments to settle and before it gets to the ocean. And those sediments, it's not only the sediment that's bad, they also carry other pollutants. So the work of Save the Wetlands Hui was funded by the County of Maui, Mayor's Office of Economic Development, and the Hawaii Land Trust is our fiscal sponsor. And we're very appreciative to both of them. This was a lot of work on everyone's part. Our project scope included wetlands inventory and mapping, and we're doing a demonstration restoration at Laie Malka wetland. And then we do things like this talk tonight for public education. And just as Amanda's doing, we want stakeholder input. So we're doing outreach to stakeholders, which is all of you. So the first question is, what's a wetland? And that's surprisingly difficult to answer. There are a lot of different definitions that different agencies have used and that different governments around the world have used and that scientists use. So we researched all of those different types of definitions. And as you can see in this picture, these are all different types of wetlands. So the wetlands can look very different and they can be different sizes and different types. So it's not that simple. The Hui, after doing that research, is proposing a broad definition of wetlands because wetlands are not a hard line. Wetlands are transitional, and wetlands change when hydrology changes, and they can appear or disappear. And we're in a phase of climate change where groundwater is going to be rising, sea level is going to be rising. So wetlands that were previously drained might reoccur. Wetlands that weren't wetlands before might become wet. So we're saying land that's periodically inundated, meaning flooded or underwater, or saturated below the ground level. In the wetlands in Kihei, they can look dry, but if you dig down just a short distance, you'll find water. It's land that even when it's dry, there are these indicators of inundation or saturation, like water-loving plants, what are called hydric soils. You might see salt on the surface of the soil or a cracked soil surface where the pools of water have dried. High water marks, debris drift, things like that, that are clues that water has been there. And it's land that provides the wetland functions and values. The lands that Amanda was presenting in her presentation are conveyances of water and places where water can spread out and sediment can settle. And when they're wet, they provide habitat. So those are lands that have wetland functions and values. Lands that have been a wetland in the past or maybe in the future with sea level rise. And this includes some terms you might be familiar with: swamps, marshes, riparian corridors, which are rivers, floodplains, and even fish ponds and other man-made or engineered wetlands. So that definition matches very closely the one used by an international convention called Ramsar that is used around the world to protect wetlands. And so why do we care so much? Well, for tonight's purposes, we're going to, pay attention to these first three functions. These wetlands function and provide what are called ecosystem services, and those services have value to our community. So not going to dwell on this in the interest of time, but obviously removing pollutants and storing and attenuating flood peaks are of interest to our talk tonight. So we had to map wetlands, and so after we defined them for ourselves and also did some advising to Tina Wildberger and Kelly King about potentially legislative definitions of wetlands. We looked at, in Kihei, the pink part is previously identified wetlands, and those were identified according to the Corps of Engineers in some case, and we don't know, in some cases, the earlier maps predate the Clean Water Act, so we're not even sure what definitions they were using. But what we do know is that less than 50% of those wetlands remain. And so the wetland study sites that we have highlighted in the kind of purpley blue there is sites that remain, wetlands that remain from the original area, as well as places that we think are wetlands within our definition of wetland. And they're also threatened. So the ones of interest to our study are those that are threatened by development. So if December 5th hadn't happened, I would probably be showing you lots and lots of maps of all of the wetlands that we've mapped and other things. But December 5th was a game changer. And I had seen a flood like that before in 2007. And it was a big reminder to me and to everyone else, I'm sure. And these are the observations that the Hui made, that these areas that are flooding are wetlands and that they've been developed. So our development is in the wetlands. And these undeveloped wetlands do hold floodwaters and settle sediments, but the sediment load is so significant. And we do believe that it is coming from Malca. I'm willing to say that, even though I can't prove it. I would love to take on the task of proving it or demonstrating how much is coming from what area. The current wetland area is not sufficient to handle these storms and all of this sediment that's coming down. And the trend is that over time, we've had storms that are decreasing in frequency, which means longer droughts in between, and they're increasing in intensity. So you're getting no rainfall for a longer time, and then a lot of rainfall in a very short time. And this pattern is going to continue and worsen due to climate change. And overall, the total amount of water is getting less too. So not only that, we're having less water resources, and what we are receiving is causing these catastrophic mud floods. So it's a formula for disaster: reduced wetland area, drought and degraded watersheds, intense storms, and that's what we get. I don't think it's a technical term, but I call them mud floods. And the solutions to me, and especially during this flooding, seeing how the wetlands just got overwhelmed by the mud and the water, that the solutions have to include watershed restoration. We can't just fix this problem by protecting wetlands at the bottom or building flood walls at the bottom. We really need to look Malca. So these are some renderings that David Dorn did from a lot of, he flies a helicopter, he flies drones, other people do that as well. We had a lot of observers out taking photos and videos. So he did these renderings of the areas that flooded. And so you have the North Kihei part by Waiakoa, and where really the worst flooding was this time. You have Kalani Hikoi over to the right on top, and Ka'onaulu. So these are the areas that Amanda's been working in. This is, some of the area where she was proposing solutions. Waipuilani, the extremely crazy small stream that comes out here and ends up flooding the park, which we actually think is a good part of urban design. If your large parks like that can be wetlands or be temporary flood basins. And then the last one is Keokea, which is down where we're working. This is the wetland near St. Teresa's Church, and we're working on the Malca side of South Kihei Road in that wetland. So I'm going to try to see if this will work, the video. So this is the north end of Waipuilani Park at the foot of Kalani Hikoi Street. So this is what that channel looks like. Historically, there was a natural wetland there. You can see it's been channelized though. And there was a lot of water coming through here. You see the high water marks. You see it over top the bank. You see it drug someone's landscaping with the water. And this is.
So I walked from Kalani Hikoi toward Whitewood.
So this water is coming from Waipuilani Gulch down the Greenway, and then it's headed down by David Mallow's church or Trinity Episcopal, where it knocked a fence down and eventually made its way into a neighborhood that has a storm basin. And you can see on Kalani Hikoi Street that there was flooding. These cars were flooded, even though they're pretty far up the street from the lowest area. So the water was backing up there. So this is Waipuilani, and you can see this is the area we were talking about where the channel is so extremely small. And you can see that these homes here over the years, most of them have, de facto flood walls that they've built to protect their property. And you can see this high water mark over here. And this is the channel going out to the ocean. This is what the park looks like when it's flooded. It's an ephemeral wetland, and the birds love that. In the right-hand corner up here is what happens sometimes when property owners are concerned about their property flooding. They come and they break the sand berm to let all the muddy water go. So that's terrible for the ocean. So we need to find a solution that protects property, but also protects the ocean. And this is just a little video of what that looks like when it's flowing. And these videos of the water flowing is the day after the flood. So this wasn't the high flow. This was afterward, the morning after. So this is Laie. This is the wetland where we're doing the restoration work. One of the things we noted right away is what floated out, from under all these invasive plants and everything where we're working. This is all debris from a homeless camp in the upper left. Somebody has been dumping in our wetlands. We find this kind of stuff all the time. Homeless people didn't bring a bunch of tires there, so somebody's deliberately dumping there. But when we look at this wetland, a lot of the water flowed out of the wetland, and it actually dried up faster than we thought it would, and we would have liked to see the water hang around longer. So some of the, for the bird habitat, and some of the questions we started to have are, is there something we can do to enhance the functions of the wetlands that we do have and let them hold the water longer, have more settlement of the sediment, and provide habitat longer? And this is what the water flowing through that wetland looked like. So this is on South Kihei Road, these basins that I'm sure you've seen before that always have water in them. That's because the road is actually a bridge there, and this is all wetland. And you can see those water lines, how high they were on the bridge. So this again is not the peak flow. This is the morning after the peak flow. So where the question came up about, water quality, how does all this affect water quality? Well, you don't really have to have any kind of science degree to see that the ocean is brown and that's really terrible and it's full of debris, and we don't like that. So, some of the things that we are concerned about is how much sediment goes out in the ocean, the nutrients that it carries, and a lot of people have brought up concerns about pesticides and herbicides because of the golf courses, bears, ag operations, and other things. So, those are some of the primary concerns. This, I'm not going to go into too much other than to tell you, these are the DOH, Department of Health, monitoring stations where they check to see, are we meeting the state water quality standards, or is the water impaired because we're not meeting the standards? And impaired means it's not supporting the uses of recreation and aquatic life support, like supporting coral and fisheries. And so we can see that this whole coastline, especially in North Kihei, is impaired. It's not meeting the water quality standards. So I wanted to draw everyone's attention, Malcolm, because when I look at this, I just say we have to do something, Malcolm, of the highway. And 10 years ago, an effort started, and I was part of that. In 2009, we started watershed planning, characterizing the watershed and writing a plan. We had a draft in 2013. That draft continued to be developed, and another draft came out in 2017. And in 2019, the plan was approved. But it is a living plan. It's something that's always changing as we're learning more. But it indeed did propose things, Malka. These red areas are what are called desilt projects. It would be projects that would give the water time to slow down and drop sediment. There's something called an excavated basin in series, or a string of pearls, some people call it. This is a blow up of that, so you could see what that would look like. And these are shallow impoundments, and the water would be diverted out of the stream, but then would go back in the stream after it's gone through all of the impoundments. And it's thought that, that this would return some water to the aquifer, keep some of the sediment on the land, and take the peak off of the flood flow. Contoured terrace ditches could capture some of the water that's coming across the landscape. Riparian protection, like down here, could, a lot of the sediment comes from the banks of the river falling into the river when there's high flows. So riparian protection. A lot of the stream beds, and in fact, a lot of the wetlands have gotten filled up with this sediment. So stream restoration and sediment removal are possibilities. And there's other, non-structural things too, like how the grazing is managed, mitigating high impact area with the animals, things like that. Stabilizing unpaved roads. There are a lot of unpaved roads in the watershed that, turn into conduits. They turn into rivers on the mountains. But what, and in the 2017 draft, but not in the 2019 draft, wetland restoration was in there. So that's one thing the Hui would like to see continue as part of the plan. I really liked what the commenter asked earlier about, could we do wetland restoration Malca of the highway or create wetlands? And I think that's an interesting question that we should look into. One thing that's been discussed a lot lately is, can we, instead of injecting our treated wastewater into the ocean through the injection wells, can we pump it Malca and use it in that dry landscape? And, the ranches could have access to it. But I would like to also say we could use it for eco restoration. And this is something that's very well proven in places on the mainland. And there's precedent for it with the regulatory aspects, to reuse wastewater, to restore wetlands, to help water the vegetation that you need to stabilize those riparian buffers and things like that. So yeah, I think there's so much possibility, Malca. Of course, those are private lands, privately held, but fortunately only a few owners. So at least it would be easier than trying to work with hundreds of owners, presumably. And like Amanda said too, we know so little. We have very little data on what is the actual stream flow, what is the actual precipitation, and the stream flow and the pollutant concentration. That's what gives you the mass of pollution that's coming down. And so we don't really know those pollutant loads. There's only been very few attempts at very few locations to even measure that. And that would be one of the things to do, like Amanda said, to figure out where the sediment's coming from, is we could measure the loads at different places in the watershed and figure out where most of it's coming from, so that we know where to focus our efforts. And this is just a little fun. This was from the draft, 2013 draft, the Paniolo data. This is from Haleakala Ranch. So the Cowboys collected this data from rain gauges. But like Amanda was saying, you can see how much it varies. Here's the Kihei gauge at the lower elevations, and then here's the one up at Poli Poli, so it's very variable across the watershed. So we really need more study of that. We really need to be able to come up with some better understanding for the models, and to make sure we're not over designing. So our recommendations are no new development in wetlands, stream beds, riparian corridors, or floodplains. Restore and enhance the functions of the existing wetlands. Restore the degraded watershed and mitigate the sediment loss. And we think we need an integrated plan. We've got the watershed plan, we've got the, save the wetlands, we've got the county drainage plan, we've got, the alternative study. We really need to integrate watershed management, flood control, and drainage. And I would like to see a community working group with stakeholder involvement, because these are big, long-term questions for all of us that really impact our lives. And then whatever it is that we come up with, it's got to be funded. So there's that. And I think there's a huge opportunity to engage community in citizen science in support of getting all the data that we need. Some themes came up for me in looking at all this. Infrastructure can be natural, like streams, wetlands, and floodplains. It can be traditional, or what they call gray infrastructure, like concrete. It can be green or low impact that mimics nature and tries to, handle the water on site. And I think we need to integrate all of those. Success, it's not a black and white thing with environmental problem solving. It's really tweaking everything that you can to get the desired outcome, and it's optimizing. How can we combine these things to get the most bang for the buck, the most water quality and the least flooding for the least money. There are some things that need to be considered, and this is an emerging issue in all discussions of stormwater and flood control and climate change, adaptation, and that is equity. So in Hawaii, we have, the Kanaka Maoli, the Native Hawaiian community that's been severely impacted by what's already happened, that's impaired all of these natural systems. And they have traditional practices and they're dependent on those natural resources. There are iwi kupuna, the bones of the ancestors are buried in these wetlands and dunes. And so that has to be respected, and whatever we're considering, has to take that into account and, try to do no harm, no damage to those things. And there's, of course, archaeological artifacts as well. And then building low income and affordable housing in, areas that are flood prone is something we really need to reconsider. Is that really a fair thing to do? Yes, we need affordable housing, but do we want to build it in a drainage way that we really need to leave undeveloped in order to solve our housing problems? And then the homeless, these streams and culverts and wetlands are the homes of people that don't have a house. And we need to accommodate that community, which in South Maui, we don't even have a shelter here for houseless people. Space is the big thing. We don't have enough space, right? We have all this water, all this sediment, the coastal flooding, is making the sea level come up, and we have the built environment, and it's all in this tiny space. And I love this picture here of, this is our volunteer coordinator, Emily. This is her son, Nico. And he is, 3 foot something. And if he was standing on top of the sediment, he would be touching the bridge. This is the Kalani Hikoi Bridge. That's how much sediment is there. And you can see also the mud up here that, the water came all the way that high, the water lines right here. So there's not enough space for all this mud and all this water in our built environment. So we have to change something with that. Fragmentation is another theme. We've fragmented the watershed natural conveyances. We've fragmented the wetlands. And in doing so, we've also fragmented and hidden some of the cultural, resources and landmarks that, I didn't even know until I started working with people who had the history here and the generational knowledge. I didn't even know that there was so much Hawaiian culture in Kihei, or the proper name would be Kula Kai. And that fragmentation even makes us think like that Kula is separate from Kihei. No, it's Kula Mauka and Kula Kai, Kula Uka and Kula Kai. So this is one watershed. We're all connected. And the highway system and other ways that we've built our environment make you think of those as separate places, but they're really very close to each other. And we've just fragmented it both physically and in our mind. And then keep in mind the temporal and spatial scale of what we're talking about here. It's especially if your property is threatened by flooding and things like that, or you like to swim in a clean ocean water, you might be impatient of, why hasn't something been done? And I think we need to start, yesterday, but we also need to realize we're talking 50,000 acres of watershed. And like the county's plan was a 20-year plan. And so these are long scale plans that we're making and implementing, and we need to get started right away, and it is urgent, but we need to be realistic about how long it's going to take. It's something you always do. You always have to take care of your watershed. It's not something that you'll get done with and then go on your way. And then it has to be holistic, the entire watershed, Mauka to Makai. You can't just fix this problem from the bottom. And just the last few concerns, we haven't even factored climate change or sea level rise into any of this. Any changes we make to alleviate flooding in one area can worsen it in others. So there's a lot of need to work with stakeholders and comprehensive planning, as opposed to what's been happening in the past, individual property owners or individual developments trying to address the drainage on their own. The sense of place is important. What it looks like visually, you know, we already said the community doesn't want a lot of concrete channels. We do want recreational and green space, but I think that we can use some of the ideas Amanda had and other people have suggested to design a system that works, that's also in keeping with our values as a community. And then there's that insufficient watershed specific data. We've got to get precipitation data, flow data, and pollutant loading data. So that's all I had. I did want to let you know that the Save the Wetlands Hui is having a Laie Malka work day this Saturday, and this will be the first time that we're actually planting some native plants. So we're super excited about that. Up to this point, we've just been removing invasive plants. So it'll be Saturday, 8 a.m. to noon, and we meet at the Meta Spa parking lot, which is right next to our wetland. It's right across the South Kihei Road from St. Teresa's, in the wetland next to St. Teresa's. And then on February 2nd, it's World Wetlands Day, and we're bringing attention to the need to value, manage, restore, and love wetlands. And that will be at Kalama Park, 4 to 6 p.m. And we'll have some statements about wetlands, and then we'll do a cleanup of the small wetland there in Kalama Park. And if you want to find us on Facebook, we have a group called Save the Wetlands. Please join us. We have a website, savethewetlands.org, and we're also on Instagram, Maui Wetlands. So that's all I had, and I appreciate having the chance to share all of that with you.
Thank you so much, Robin. We did have two items in the chat, and one is not a question, but it was just a comment, which I think most of us know that live here, that was pointing out that the county also, or probably even more so, opens up those blocks at the beach. We had the picture of the couple of residents doing it. But yes, I mean, Public Works has told us that openly. That's our job, is to open it up and let it flow, because property is going to get damaged, and it's not their kuleana to protect the ocean. So I think everybody else knows that. And
they absolutely do. And but it is the kuleana of the county. Water is a public trust resource, and I know they tell me that all the time too, but I don't believe it. But yeah, the county does that, but they are doing it within some bounds of what the regulations allow them to do.
Good point. And then the question there from Randy is, what is the status of our county? I don't know that you could answer that because you're not representing the county, but if you want to take a shot at it.
I can tell you what's going on with legislation. Kelly King drafted some legislation in the CARE committee, and the committee did pass that on to the planning commissions for review. I am not quite sure when that's going to happen or if it's happened. I haven't heard anything about that, but I hope it hadn't happened yet, because I'd like to testify on it. And then after that, that county legislation will come back to the CARE committee, and then, you know, would go to the full council. The state level, Tina Wildberger has been drafting some legislation, and I believe she's going to propose it this session. So, you know, lots to watch with our attempts to, you know, improve our protection of wetlands, because they're really valuable. And you know, if you think the flooding was already bad, you know, how many more homes would flood if all of those areas we were looking at were developed? And then I see a question, what can be done to actually create retention ponds? I think the ranches would welcome them on their lands, as this could create much improved grazing lands from the nutrient mud and extra water. Yes, the ranches are actually talking about this, and I saw was a county committee it might have been the infrastructure committee. And they were talking about sending the R1 water up the mountain to have a big retention pond that could then be used for watering and growing buffalo grass. And, there's a lot of win-win there. And like I said, that water also could be used for restoring the stream banks and, keeping the soil with vegetation on it so that it's not just all washing down the mountain. So I'm optimistic. I think that we can reduce the flooding and protect the water quality. So I'm excited that, after 10 years of studying this myself, that I see other people on board, and maybe now's the time for action.
Well, thank you, Robin. And yes, it's because of people like you that there is hope. Instead of just saying, well, throwing our hands up and saying, well, man screwed it up, so we have to live with it. Well, no, we have to start doing something to change the situation. And having you come, and honestly, you are. I keep records of all that kind of stuff. You have presented more often than anyone else, and no wonder. I mean, you're the water quality expert, and if there's anything that's such a big issue to our district, it is all this encompassing things that you address and you bring to us. So we much appreciate it, and we'll. Now we can lead into our surprise guest and a surprise announcement. So thank you, Robin, for that. And we'll introduce Jill Wirt, who is going to give us a unannounced announcement tonight. It's time for me to quit. I got to go have something to eat. Jill, take it away, please.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm going to share my screen as well. Okay. Aloha, everyone. Thank you so much again for having me. My name is Jill Wirt, and I am a project and research coordinator for Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. And I am here because we are proud to announce that we are the recipient of a $210,000 grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and NOAA's National Coastal Resilience Fund for our project titled Conducting Site Assessments and Planning to Address Recurring Coastal Flooding here in Hawaii. This project will address recurring stormwater flooding in the Hapapa watershed, impacting the coastal community of Kihei. Thanks to this grant, we will be conducting site assessments and planning of the proposed nature-based solutions to address the flooding that's taking place in the gulches of Kalani Hakoi, Waipuilani, and Keokea, the three gulches which are responsible for most of Kihei's stormwater flooding. We'll be working with Amanda Cording as well as others in the community, including all stakeholders, to assess the possible nature-based solutions and identify those that have the most potential to prevent floods in North Kihei. 3 project priorities will be identified through this process. So this is very exciting. Because this grant award is the first step in a potential funding pipeline. So after this step, we can apply to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and NOAA for funding for designing and permitting the priority projects that we identify. And after that, apply for funding to implement 1 or more priority projects. So this could result in millions of dollars coming into our community to address the flooding in North Kihei. So it's very exciting, lots of fun, hard work coming up in the future over the next year. So to stay in touch with our progress, you can go to mauireefs.org and sign up for our free monthly newsletter, Reef in Brief. Thank you so much for letting me come on and share about what we're up to, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Jill. It was kind of fun to keep you under wraps till the end, but it's certainly encouraging to wrap up the meeting with this wonderful news. And I remember hearing from Ann Valero that you were pursuing this grant, and now great that has been received. And what you're telling us is this is not a one-time thing, that it's opening up a pipeline for more funding. So very good news to get to wrap up our meeting this evening. So thank you very much for holding off till the very end and presenting that to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. Okay, folks, so we're going to wrap up here, and we thank everybody who participated. And if you did participate and you're telling somebody about the meeting, they're like, oh, I missed it. Well, we'll have the recording of the meeting available on our website probably tomorrow. So we Rob Weltman, for our vice president and jack of all trades and master of most of them, usually gets these done very quickly. So anybody that missed it this evening, they can catch it, and it'll be up there for a while. Then we'll be back in 2 months for our next meeting. But again, we encourage everybody, remember, please, we are a membership organization, and you get all the benefits without being a member. But if we have no members, there'll be no organization, and then all this will be lost. So we thank everyone who participated. And as we've been saying since we had virtual meetings, we used to tell everybody get home safe, but hopefully you're already home safe now. And so maybe 2022 will be a good year for all of us. Mahalo again, and a hui ho.